Hello and welcome to this session of Introduction to Autonomous Systems. If you recall, in the last session we had introduced the idea of what autonomy is, and we talked about in what way it is going to be of value to us in creating autonomous systems. In this segment, we will look at the autonomy attributes and also bring in the ideas of various levels of autonomy that are important for us to look at in the context of developing such systems. So, let us begin today's session. When we look at autonomy attributes, we find that if we characterize these attributes, they give us a clear insight into the very nature of the concept of autonomy. And it is to be noted here that any physical system that is to be termed as autonomous or even semi-autonomous, it is a term that we are going to look at a little bit more closely towards the later part of this lecture, must possess at least one of the 5 attributes that we presented in the last lecture. So, which means we are actually admitting the possibility that getting all those 5 attributes plus the 6th one, which is your knowledge base, is not going to be very easy. So, you may live with something which is probably not 100%. Of course, at some point and as an initial hypothesis, we always look for a fully autonomous systems. So, obviously, what we intend is that every functionality of that system should be ensured by a suitable machine and not by any human. So, that is the primary idea when we look at a fully autonomous system. Similarly, if we go to the other end of the spectrum, we will have systems which will be fully under overall human supervision and hence will have no autonomy. And that brings us to the important question of how do we assess or implement the extent of autonomy and how do we classify or categorize such systems. Now, to do that, we have to first admit the possibility that it may be possible to have any one or some of the 5 attributes through a suitable machine as its components. In fact, we may not even have that particular attribute to the full extent, we may only have it in a partial manner. The implication of doing such a thing is primarily that there will be some functions which will become independent of humans, and this is how many developments have and will take place in the context of creating autonomous systems, that you provide one functionality in a machine to some extent, keep improving upon it until it reaches the level that you desire, take another functionality and try to replace the humans with the machine, and as you keep doing this in a, let us call it a manner of a pyramid, keep building up from bottoms up, towards the end you would have a fully autonomous system whose every functionality would be enabled by a machine. And all such systems which have not reached the level of full autonomy will be called semi-autonomous systems. All of them will come under the basic umbrella of a partially autonomous system. But then, as you would have noted, even within this there would be kind of gradations, like some systems would be at a lower level, some systems might be at slightly higher level, and we need to understand this in order to be able to correctly capture the extent of autonomy that we have been able to incorporate in any given system for whatever purposes that we may have in mind. And that has brought in the idea of the levels of autonomy that we need to consider. Now, before we get into the actual description of the levels, there is one prerequisite that we need to consider, and that is we need to decide to what extent we actually want a system to be autonomous. This is something which is critical, because the effort, particularly in the context of the design and synthesis, would directly be related to the extent to which we want a system to become autonomous and achieve a particular level that we may be interested in. And we have to also accept that at different levels of autonomy, there are going to be a trade-off between the extent of machine empowered autonomy and human assisted functionality, which means now there is going to be a give and take between these two aspects, that as you give up human assisted functions and take them to machine empowered functionality, you are going to higher level than the level at which you are currently there. It is clear that higher levels of autonomy would result are being replaced. So, this is the way most of the evolution or development of autonomous systems will take place. What I am trying to point out is that you do not create full autonomy right in the beginning. Not only it is perhaps not feasible from the technological constraints that may come in, but more importantly, this would also be a bit of a risky proposition, as you would not have verified the possibilities of some failures occurring because of some functionality was not correctly implemented. So, what people generally try to do is they make one change to make it autonomous from a human assisted role, and then perhaps test it out sufficiently before saying that okay, now we are ready to go to the next level. You can look at any development of autonomous system, it always is in this format. So, I just want to show you a picture which brings in this 5-dimensional representation of the attributes and the levels that are visible in that representation of attributes. So, what I have done is I have represented those 5 attributes as the 5 vertices of a pentagon. So, you have perception on one side, you have reflection, then you have goal management given by the blue arrow, and then you have planning with the purple arrow, and then self adaptation which is the green arrow. Now, apart from this pentagon, you will notice there is another smaller pentagon which I have created inside the same pentagon, and this is where now I am putting the idea that the inner pentagon is what represents the various attributes and the levels which have been empowered by a machine. So, you can clearly see that not only the system is not fully autonomous, but different attributes are also given different extent, which means, for example, if you see the planning is at a slightly higher level, but your perception could be at lower level, reflection could be at a reasonable level. So, you will find that you can choose which particular aspect of a particular functionality is to be given a particular empowerment through a machine at a specific level. And of course, it is quite intuitive to see that as the inner pentagon expands in different directions, our level of autonomy increases progressively, and at some point when the inner pentagon completely covers the outer pentagon, then the system would have become fully autonomous. Now, of course, here I have shown that all 5 attributes are present through machine empowerment, but to various degrees. Strictly speaking, even that is not necessary. The inner area need not necessarily be a pentagon. It could be a quadrilateral, it could be a triangle, indicating that there are only 2 or 3 functionalities which are being considered, and only maybe 2 or 3 attributes. For example, you may do only perception and planning through a machine, rest everything could be driven by humans. So, it can be any of those scenarios. I just want to show you this table now. The reason for bringing in this table is that recently we have been hearing lot about these autonomous cars, robo-taxis and similar kind of transportation systems which are being considered for autonomous operations. Now, because currently the developments are primarily in the context of vehicles, SAE, which is the Society for Automotive Engineers, has taken upon itself the role of defining in some manner the various levels of autonomy that the vehicle should adhere to as a kind of a standard. So, this is in some sense a kind of a standard for autonomy which has been created for vehicles. So, we start with level 0, which says there is no automation, no autonomy, it is fully under human control, which is currently many of the vehicles that are being driven by us, they are completely under human control by and large. The next level, the level 1, is typically called in the present context hands on, which means the driver is required to assist the autopilot and driver needs to have full situational awareness, which means your hand must be on the steering wheel, but there will be some functionality in the background which would be empowered by a machine, and to that extent there will be some things which will happen in an autonomous manner. The next is what is called hands off, the level 2, where it is possible for the driver to remove his or her hands from the steering wheel. It is no longer necessary, steering wheel or the gear, and this primarily comes in the context where the autopilot takes over the highway driving, where it is very straightforward, straight road, no signals, no turns, all the vehicles moving at the same speed. So, it is kind of a very benign scenario or environment where the automation which is being provided or the autonomy which is being implemented through a machine is sufficient to execute the driving operation. The next is slightly now higher level, where you say it is eyes off, meaning that now it is not necessary for the driver to keep looking at the road all the time or at the various displays which are there inside the on the dashboard. So, this is what is typically called by SAE as conditional automation. Here driver needs to intervene when requested. So, there is going to be an alert generated or a kind of a voice message saying that please take over the steering wheel, and driver needs to be alert so that can immediately take over. Now, the next level, which is level 4, is something which is still considered a very high level of automation or autonomy. It is called mind off, meaning that now you do not even need to think that you are driving the vehicle. The car is sufficiently able to manage the driving operation, and typically areas which are geo-fenced, the car completely drives itself, you do not have to worry about it. And finally, the level 5 called the full automation, there is no human intervention required. This is what is being planned as a robotic taxi. That is what people are currently considering. The steering wheel is optional, but the problem is that humans, they are so used to looking at, and if they do not see the steering wheel, they might get a bit nervous. So, it is just provided as a kind of a prop, and it keeps rotating in a synthetic manner, just to give the passengers an impression that things are being driven in a normal fashion. Now, this in nutshell talks about different levels of autonomy that your autonomous system can have, starting with no automation or level 0 to full automation, which is level 5. So, the question which arises at this point, are current vehicles that people are talking about fully autonomous? So, there are two examples which I am going to present to give you an idea of what people are trying to do. So, currently the Tesla's autopilot is nothing but an advanced driver assistance system, or what we call ADAS. That is what has been implemented for the current models of Tesla, which provides partial vehicle automation corresponding to level 2. Level 2, if you see, is something like hands off, which means it is providing a hands off autonomy, but you still have things like eyes off, minds off and full automation. So, those levels are still far away. There is another vehicle which we will talk about little later. So, what it does actually at the level 2, if you look at what the autonomous version of Tesla does, is has a feature of auto steer, and it has a traffic aware cruise control. Of course, they have also developed what is called an optional package called full self driving, but under supervision. So, this is equivalent of level 4, where you need some what you call human intervention. This is called FSD or full self driving. There is a beta version which is currently available, which the customers can opt for in case they want to try out some advanced features of the autonomous behavior. There is a counterpart, another vehicle BYD from China. It currently offers level 2 plus, it has not reached level 3, but it is slightly better than level 2 in driving. That includes lane changes, and it is almost level 4 during parking assistance, which is something similar to the FSD package, which is also being offered by Tesla. All this information has come from, you can get it from Google search, is available, is an open domain information about these two vehicles. So, you realize that while SA is talking about levels 3, 4 and 5, the current autonomous developments are essentially at level 2. And please note, this is after an intense research of maybe more than a decade that autonomy has reached level 2. There is a feeling generally that level 5 may be not only reasonably difficult to achieve, but also may not be fully desirable, as people may want still some human intervention in these vehicles. So, to conclude this part, concept of autonomy, as we have seen, provides a generic framework for both understanding as well as synthesizing autonomous systems, and the basic attributes that we want to include provide us with a facility to do it partially and have systems whose autonomy is at different level, as indicated by the 5 levels of autonomy that SAE has considered. So, with that we come to the end of the present session. Hope to see you in the next session, where we will take this topic a little further. So, it is bye for now and thank you.